The first hit came like a mallet in the bones, a flat, cracking thud that blew shale from the lane bank and hammered the Sherman suspension to stillness. Hale was already up in the cupola, seeing no gun, only the long, straight avenue of damp earth between hedges and, at its far pinch, the faint silhouette of a shield that didn't move. He didn't need it to move. "Smoke! Now!" he barked, and his voice was a shove. The loader's hand snapped the turret-mounted M3 plungers. The driver kicked his heel to trip the rear pot. The launchers coughed, and a breath later a thick white river began to pour, belching from brackets and the tail like steam. The lane took it in and became cloud. Hale counted, one hand steady on the turret ring, the other pushing his binos into his chest as if to hold himself down. For one junkyard second, he saw metal teeth skittering. The immobilized lead Sherman ahead of them, its right idler wheel sagging like a broken wrist, track flayed from the sprocket. A follow-up hit slapped its glacis, then took a bite out of the hedge bank, and Hale ducked as pebbles peppered his bare neck. The angle of that bite told him the gun was low, typical Bocage, covering dead straight. Smoke ate the view. He needed to make the lane stop being straight before the screen thinned, and the next round wrote their names. Moreau twisted to the radio set, the throat mic snagging his collar, squelch whining as he dialed for the company net. Static had a grain tonight. Drizzle made it sound like bacon in a pan. Signal had rotated call signs at noon. Hale had scribbled the new ones on his map margin, but the paper was wet, and Moreau's hand shook as he tuned. Voices overlapped, somebody screaming for Red 2, for God's sake. And then the immobilized tank's voice cut to a hiss, its battery giving a last little sigh. "Lead is dark," Moreau said, too fast, and the way his voice went tight made Hale look, because tight meant he might swallow a word and hand someone the wrong death. "Say it slow," Hale snapped, eyes on milk, "and get me Pike." He wanted the lieutenant cautious and close, but not so close he'd bump their tail inside this fog and turn one dead hull into a pileup. He mouthed the lane's measure like a catechism. 8 feet, maybe 10. Their hull was 8'7". Inches lived or killed in those gaps. Lasky's hands were damp where they clamped the levers. The driver's slit gave him nothing now but a world of churned white. He could feel the lane's camber through the seat, a slope rightward toward a drainage that always ran under Normandy lanes like veins. The hedgerows were not hedges. They were walls, their earthen core thick with roots, 4 feet high and cork-hard, their crowns tangled. The tank did not belong in this country. It had been forced into it. He pictured the cross-section plan of the road, the culvert slant he'd stared at every time they'd rolled this way. It ran diagonally beneath the lane just before the gap he thought he remembered at the next hedgerow. If he drifted right with the weight of the tank's nose at the turn, the unsupported edge would take the track and drop it into nothing. The hull would bell, their belly plate would ring, and they'd sit like a tin tray for the Bocage. Left, a hedge bank. Right, a narrow negative space pretending to be soil. He tapped his boot heel twice, his metronome when sight meant nothing, and timing was everything. Each second in first gear meant a yard, give or take. He set it under his breath and hated it the instant it left, as if speaking invited the wrong yard. Lieutenant Pike's voice came thin and dry through the static as if washed and wrung out. "Sable 1, position. Negative fire without identify. Report." Moreau's eyes flicked to Hale. Hale wanted to say everything at once. "Bocage covers lane. Lead immobilized. Smoke up. Infantry pinned at the T-junction ahead. We're screening withdrawal." He held every word like a blade. Pike's caution was something Hale normally respected. There was enough wild in Hale for 2 men, but caution now risked a pause that would let the Bocage's crew adjust on sound and send a third shot to finish the line. He could hear the metallic click of Pike considering authority. "Sable 2, hold." Hold. Hale pictured a pause as something visible, a wavering silhouette in the smoke, a straight lane, a gunner behind a German shield imagining the geometry. In the background of the net, a woman's alto cut in, Sergeant Capel, voice steady and pitched to carry over clutter, and the steadiness made everything else sound noisy. "We are at the T2 litter. One man cannot move. Smoke is thin. That gun has us. I need 30 seconds of white." She wasn't pleading. She was clocking their death. Pike said, "Stand by," because the handbook demanded and because his mind was adding risk, not opportunity. The silence after "stand by" was a canyon. Hale could hear drizzle ticking on the turret roof as the countdown started anyway. Hale dropped into the turret. The grease pencil was already in his hand. Whenever the world went to milk, he drew maps on anything, and the turret wall was canvas enough. He sketched a line for the lane, marked the place where the lead tank sat bleeding track, put a box for the Bocage shield at the far throat, then drew, without looking, the culvert cut, angled across their path, the weak edge, the hole waiting like a mouth. He added the hedgerow gap he remembered to the left, barely wider than them, a place where a farm cart once cut through and left a wound in the earth bank that never healed. He tapped the pencil at the gap and then circled the culvert mouth. "We can't go back," he said to Lasky and to the loader, to the gunner who was licking his tooth out of habit and pretending it helped aim. "We go forward, blind. We count. We pivot through here and push out behind that shield's line of sight. We rake the hedge and give Capel her seconds." He spoke like a man describing a trick he'd already watched work. The loader swallowed. "Mind stakes on the right," he said, "because fear finds stakes when there are any." They'd seen the S-mines here 3 days ago, little posts with mean manners planted along the verge to spit steel balls waist high. "We don't touch the verge," Hale said, and because he needed to be both proof and promise, he put his finger on the drawn culvert and tapped until he felt bone. Outside, the smoke drank the lane, thickened by damp air and held low by the cloud. The wind that had been a caress all day became a little push, westerly and fickle. The white moved like a living thing, its bellies and holes flexing. It banked against the hedges and sagged into the lane, then thinned in strange windows when the wind thought to tug. Through one, for a fragment's heartbeat, the Bocage shield presented itself, a rectangle oh so slightly canted, its tires angled to climb the ditch if needed. Hale saw the silhouette as a fact, not a ghost, and his heart stamped once, hard. That gun was set to kill straight. If they could come off the straight, they might be a whisper in the gunner's ears, rather than a line in his sight. The itch to lob he at the shadow burned his finger, but the hedges would catch most of the hate, and a blind shot would give the gun their lungs. Minutes here were rocks, seconds were coins. A mortar's moan came soft through the pad of the engine. German tubes had registered this lane earlier. You didn't need a map to know it, only the way patterns turned runtime into rhythm. The first shell landed short, into their own smoke, and turned white into a sudden donut, a hole punched like a mouth gasping. Shrapnel fizzed and whipped at the Sherman's hide, flicking little taps like angry fingernails. Inside, the tiny dings were a symbol, masking the slight changes in engine load that Lasky used to feel the road. He clenched his jaw and lifted his feet off the floor for an instant to feel with his spine what he could not hear. It made the world thinner, as if he were one nerve strung from the tank's nose to its tail. The loader swore softly and checked the coax feed. The gunner rolled his shoulders and steadied the 30, thumb on the trigger paddle, other hand near elevation, waiting for a word he could ride. Moreau pushed into the net again. "Sable 1 to Pike. We are screening now. Negative identification through smoke. Capel needs cover." The carrier barked back, Pike's tone a clipped acquiescence, painted over by doctrine. "Execute smoke only. Do not maneuver without report." Hale stared at the grease pencil circle and then at the white around him, and the order became an obstacle, not a law. Doctrine didn't account for culverts set at wrong angles or for gaps born from cattle habit. "Capel," Hale said into the net, not asking permission, but building a ladder. "Count down when ready to lift." The infantrywoman came back with a simple "on you," which in its brevity carried trust and terror in equal measure. Somewhere, not far, a man moaned between shells. It was a sound not made for radios. Hale flipped to interphone so only his men heard him breathe. The second mortar dropped behind them, shivering the rear deck where the smoke pot burned. The sudden cough changed the way the white curled. The rear plume hiccuped and then threw a thicker rope. The smoke pots were not infinite. The turret-mounted grenades would give a handful of fat breaths, and the rear pot would burn only so long before it choked on its own feed. Hale watched the white bloom like a baker watches dough. "We go," he said to Lasky. Not loud. He didn't want the word to bounce out the open commander's hatch and carry into the smoke, where friendly ears might be arranged with unfriendly impulse. Pike's hold still hung on the net like an unanswered telephone. Hale pulled the cupola down, rested his elbows on the ring, and took one more look at his pencil map. He drew an arrow through the gap, then scratched a little X where the ditch's throat would be, not to mark doom, but to frame it. Lasky shifted his palm, felt the floral whine of first gear biting, and eased his foot. The tank answered. The world moved, but he couldn't tell how much was them and how much was Smoke's living skin crawling along the hedges. He began the count. 1 Mississippi, 2. The old trick to turn time into yardage when compasses and sight were jokes. 4, he said aloud as his heel tapped, a ritual learned driving trucks where hedges were quaint. The loader fed the coax, chain clinking. When the order came, there could be no hesitation, only noise and bullets. The gunner leaned into his sight even though it showed him milk, a tone trained by months to make eyes believe sound. The lane was just wide enough that if they held dead center, they owned it. If they drifted, they borrowed danger. The hedgerow roots scraped the Sherman skirts with a sound like nails across slate. Bark and earth shuddered along steel. Sap, wounded and green, pushed through hatch edges. "Left a hair," Hale said, not a suggestion. Lasky felt left with a lever, a slight brush that altered nothing and everything. He kept counting. 7, 8. The number meant a distance that put them near where the culvert angled beneath, if his memory hadn't lied. He had every rattle of this lane in his bones, but a lane in smoke is a different animal, its measurements warped by fear. Braced behind their guns, the Germans were patient men with calculators in their heads, Hale told himself, and patient men needed to be startled. He looked at his grease-pencil arrow, the gap. "As soon as we nose the hedge, I want coax on that line. Walk it." The gunner nodded without looking, jaw tight, finger light, as if resting on a sleeping shoulder. Hale wanted to add "he" into the hedge where he guessed the crew crouched behind that paquet, but he saved powder for when sound became fact. He kept Capel's 30 seconds as a metronome, counted forward, knew she had men on blankets that weren't meant for dragging, and that her smoke was down to pebbles. The white played tricks. Through it, for a breath, another shape in the far hedge. 2 helmets, a tube between them, a man's shoulder hunched with purpose. The image was there and gone, like a fish in a river. Moreau stiffened, headset cord pulling taut like a leash. On the net, a too loud young voice, bravado held together by instructions, cut in. "Bazooka team able at far hedge, firing on engine noise." That ripped a tear through this plan. Friendly fire has its own physics, and it isn't a science you test at 10 yards. Hale put a flat palm on the turret ring. "Able, hold, positive ID only. We're in the smoke," he snapped, but static braided his words. Moreau repeated, syllables spaced like rivets. "Hold fire, friendly in smoke. Say again, hold." In the white outside, a hand tightened around a tube grip, skin whitening under strain, a thing that could be seen even in fog. If they came through at the wrong angle, they'd present a flank like a brick wall to a friendly rocket meant for the enemy. A clatter like tin on stone rang under their hull, the empty grenade canisters tumbling on the wet lane, bumping their belly before they bounced away to lie like metal eggs in grass. That sound would be as good a direction finder as any to the Bocage crew. The clink marked where an American tank breathed. Hale imagined a German gunlayer's hand on traverse, polite pressure as he led a ghost through cotton. He chose decision over imagined etiquette. He gripped Lasky's shoulder and squeezed hard enough to hurt. "When I say cut right then left, no drift, count it, keep the nose high." Lasky nodded through steel and cloth, small faith given and received under fire. Moreau's net went sideways again, Capel now counting, voice close and calm. 3, 2, 1. Moving. Hale tasted the word moving like a coin. The smoke's bottom edge shivered where wind licked it. Mortar shrapnel pinged higher on the hull, a bright new hi-hat in the orchestra. The world inside compressed to breathing and engine, to the mathematics of a gear tooth biting and releasing. The loader's lips moved. He was mouthing a prayer, or a count or both, because a tank crew becomes a single animal, and animals hum when they're afraid. Hale bent to the turret wall and kissed the grease pencil mark, the stupid ritual that made him part of the map. He craned into the periscope. It gave him back fog and his own fear, nothing useful, nothing he'd put in a report. He didn't believe in omens. There were too many not to read anyway. The winds shift, the nets stutter, the first Bazooka team in days without a panel, the culvert like a trapdoor, his driver's tapped heel. "We go into it," he said, final, and slammed the hatch with his palm, sealing out the last ribbon of daylight as the world turned entirely white. Lasky kicked the clutch and felt the tank hunch like a muscle under skin, the transmission whining in first as the periscope dissolved to milk. He tapped the face of his watch and started counting, marrying seconds to the steady thrum of the Continental radial, the way Hale drilled for zero-viz. The slit showed only a soft gray nowhere. Rain speckled the glass. White poured in eddies past the armored hood, like wool. He eased left, inching, because the lane was 8-10 feet tops, and the Sherman was 8-7 across. Clearance by inches, not a foot. And somewhere ahead, the earthen Bocage bank should brush the fenders if he was true. He listened for bark against the sides, for the scrape that meant he was hugging it right, counting to a culvert he couldn't see and wouldn't feel until late. The first mortar whump was felt more than heard. Air slapped, then a hail of dry metal against the glacis like handfuls of pebbles, shrapnel pinging and skittering, making the hull ring like a bell and smearing out the delicate cues of engine note Lasky used to orient. The smoke pulsed with the concussion, holes punched and then resealed by the damp wind, a breath that kept pushing their white back along the lane. Hale hooked 2 fingers over the turret rim, braced, and jabbed the grease pencil sketch he'd made. The lane, the culvert angled, the hedge gap, a heel turn through an opening nobody could see. He tapped the drawn culvert twice, then tapped Lasky's shoulder, counting louder because seconds were distance, and distance was a price. Moreau hunched over the set, handset jammed to ear under the leather, static like tearing paper. The company net was jammed, rotating call signs, too many stepping on each other, artillery crackle, turning syllables to mush. Pike's voice rode the noise. Blue 2 to Blue 1, say position, flattened by tension and antenna angle. Moreau wedged their call in. Blue 1 moving, blind in smoke, say again. But another voice cut through high and tight, not on the tank net at all, a shouted line carried by the smoke itself. Engine at left, on sound, ready. A bazooka team in the hedge with orders to fire by ear. He shoved down the urge to yell out a hatch. There was no rear field phone, no panel to hold up in blowing white, only his voice and a channel that ate voices. Hale's mouth was at Moreau's ear. "Friendly bazooka left hedge," he said, a command even if it wasn't. "Keep them off our hide." Moreau's fingers shook. He thumbed transmit. "All blue. Blue 1. Do not fire into the smoke. Friendly's moving. Hold fire." But a burst stepped on him, the line turning to sand. He killed it, switched to interphone, voice 2 notches sharper because fear pinched him thin. "Bazooka at left. They think we're a stoogie. They'll shoot at engine." The engine filled their heads like blood. They nosed forward until bark squealed along the right sponson, and Lasky breathed out. Hedge contact drifted the sticks to let the hull kiss the bank, to hold center. The lane throat hit a culvert cut diagonally, so the right edge held nothing but the illusion of earth. Hale held up 4 fingers, chopped them down. 4 seconds to culvert. 4 to the gap. Lasky's count hit 2 when the wind made a choice and dragged the screen back on itself. The white ahead went thin in wobbly panes, glass set at random, giving fractured views down the lane like postcards in a flick book. Through one hole, a shape revealed, spindly legs, a slab crouched low, the Paquet 40's face. It was exactly wrong and then exactly right, a glance before the smoke knitted, but Hale had enough. He slewed left to rake the spear of hedge that would be the gun's flank if geometry was honest. "Coax," he said, then louder. "Coax." The .30 cal spat a long zipper into green wall at 10 o'clock, stitching hard lines, bark and leaves shredding, the stream vanishing at 20 feet and reappearing as tracers in cotton. He wanted less kill than pin, hold heads down behind steel while they gambled with the culvert. Another mortar landed. The smashed air thud shook dust from the floor plates and fuzzed pencil marks. Moreau flinched, head ducking for a hole the bow didn't have, and his voice jumped, "Blue 2! We are moving! Moving, Capel, if you can hear!" Static ate her name and returned the bare breath of someone else's prayer. Outside, something hollow clattered, the ejected smoke canisters rolling under hedgerow. No good as signals, just debris announcing presence. The rear pot kept belching as long as Lasky's release held, fogging heavier, but the westerly folded it strangely, making blind spots that could be blades. Hale's body wound tight as wire. He'd counted 4. He wanted that culvert under them in 3 and change, but he was wary of pushing. The M4A1 was a blunt-nosed thing, high-skulled, its engine a chorus of cylinders humming through the hull like a heartbeat you could misread. He pressed his palm on Lasky's shoulder. Pause a half, because he needed the ditch's song. In training, you learn a hollow, how a lane over a void throws your noise back thin. The culvert, offset from center, would echo under the right a beat before the left. Lasky let the engine idle a breath, then rolled. The right side pitch came subtle, feather-light emptiness. "Culvert under right," he hissed, and knew the next yard decided whether a 30-ton hull rang the edge and knifed down. Moreau heard something else, the raw air voice outside, not radio. Shape in thinning far hedge, 2 men low, tube angled, a white-knuckled hand wrapped on a trigger. Recognition panels were useless in cotton. Their unit had them folded behind the turret. He pulled breath and screamed into interphone and into the unhelpful world. "Friendly! Blue 1! Friendly!" Orders had drilled the infantry, fire on engine noise, and his voice shook because fear made its own radio. The wind slid again and thinned smoke along their left, framing, absurdly, the immobilized Sherman behind, just long enough to see its sagging idler and track hanging like dead skin. Shapes around it were desperate and too big for the lane. A poot of rapid German mortar fire walked short, bracketed toward nearer sound, and a tight pattern of iron pellets chewed the lane ahead, skipping off wet stone and root. Lasky flinched at the skitter on his vision block. It made the world spatter and then go whiter, and he almost lost his count. 2 more yards, then left stick, hard. "Gap will be there," Hale said, and lied like a truth because it kept geometry in their heads and panic out. He rapped where bark should be on the right, bone of hedgerow, and Lasky stroked the stick to keep the hull pressed to that earthen shoulder. The plan was ugly and simple. Brush the right bank until the culvert began, ease left, let the nose ride the gap's mouth like a fish, then pivot on the inner track, left locking and dragging roots, right stepping the void by inches. Misstep and the right dropped. They'd belly out and offer a flank like a chopping block. Moreau punched transmit even though the net was a mess. Capel, 2 seconds. Your junction. Stand by. His words braided into others. A medic's curse. A shouted grid. Pike's insistence. Confirm position, Blue One. And he gave the only thing he had. In smoke. At culvert. Do not fire left. He saw one helmet at the far hedge glance to its partner. The tube wavered, a finger whitening on the trigger like bone coming through skin, and his brain tossed him his mother's kitchen sink for no reason. Noise does that. Hale slammed his palm into Lasky's helmet, left now, and Lasky yanked the left lever to lock while feeding a whisper of throttle so the right track would step. The hull lurched. The turret ring hissed under twist. The right sponson kissed bark in a long, tearing squeal, like fabric ripping, but was roots-giving, old wood snapping under 30 tons. The smell of green shattered filled the turret. The Sherman's nose drew a blind arc toward the gap, a cut rucked through centuries of root by hands and water, and the left side thumped a ridge hard enough to click teeth. The coke spat again. Hale feathered the trigger to right lines where the paquet ought to be if the field of fire matched doctrine. Guns in Normandy didn't waste lanes. He didn't want to hit so much as build a no-go fence, a ghost wall of tracers. In the rip of the 30 came a deeper cough from farther up lane, a paquet speaking through cotton, impossible to plot with their own engine roaring, and mortars complicating the soundscape. Hale felt its shape and prayed they were off its line. The smoke breathed. Pike's voice became a scold sharpened by fear. Blue One, hold until clearance. Repeat, do not move without... Hale cut his transmit and did not answer. A second to argue topped their risks. If Pike insisted on permissions, they'd bracket themselves in and die in a rule. Eddie, he said instead, feel the ditch, half a yard, then commit. All they had left was human sense for emptiness under iron. Lasky rolled up throttle just enough to beat inertia. Superstition says tanks need momentum in uncertain ground, or the earth decides for you. He leaned left as if mass would follow. The right suspension cycled over something that wasn't there. The sound under that side went thin. Culvert whisper. The sponson's outer edge brushed nothing, then clacked something loose, a rock or lip, and in that heartbeat he knew. Correct too much right, and they fall in. Too much left, and they ride the bank and kiss their own bazooka's line of fire. He took neither and held the narrow. Metal thudded left. An ejected smoke canister pinged wet stones and scuttled under hedgerow like a small creature, then went still. The sound gave a bearing in the void. Lasky used it like a compass. 3 seconds first gear to clear the diagonal, then 1.5 feet of bite on the left to slide the nose toward the off-angle gap he was guessing. The lane's width, 8, maybe 9, versus a hull's unforgiving 8.7. The bark scrape deepened to a grinding burr as the right fender stripped trunk. If the gap wasn't there, they'd wedge and offer their flank to a field gun with theatrical stupidity. Sergeant Capel cut back in, steady as a clock with blood on it. Tank, smoke good, junction ahead, 12 yards, enemy AT front right, wounded, ready to move. Ready to move was a promise and a plea. Fail, and her men would crawl into sight lines with a stretcher. Another mortar jammed its brass knuckles into the smoke and punched a halo hole that let daylight slant. White became cream, then gray. In that lighter tone, a human economy of motion along the far hedge resolved. A K crew cranking and closing, hands like metronomes. The gun's barrel tipped, a black line in milk, hungry to be right. The wind licked the smoke east, thinning a corridor in threads. They were about to give that crew a muzzle to focus on. Hale had to make his engine notes say one thing, while his mass did another. He dragged the traverse and swung the gun where the shield had been in that split of light. "Walk it," he ordered, and Moreau stitched 30s through leaf and wood. Tracers were invisible at this range inside smoke. Only rhythm told the story, a steady sowing of doubt along the hedge. He was bracketing a ghost. The turret cut a wider circle than the hull could stand. The tube dipped close to hedgerow, threatened to spear the bank, the breech clanking the turret's ribs. Lasky's left track found honest dirt. He eased power the way you set a book back on a shelf. The right chattered on the culvert lip, thunked to something wooden, old sleepers under there, and bit again. The tank pivoted around some point in his chest. The bow slewed, the hull sliding near parallel to the hedge, and a vertical shadow line appeared in the milk, a change in density that meant void under hedge, not a gate, but a bruise. The gap was too narrow and wrong-angled, offset by the culvert he couldn't reverse over. He'd guessed its presence right, and its angle wrong. He had to bend steel to the earth. Hale swore, low. Damp earth, hot oil, and cordite sour hung on his tongue. The rear pot coughed its last. The turret grenades were spent. 2 short bumps, he said. In zero vis, Sherman's count by time. 2 seconds idle. 2 in first. Power off, brake, feel the roll settle. Lasky nudged the nose into root and soil where growth said no, and weight said yes, and the fender screamed and then went silent as it sliced brush. They were making their own opening 2 inches at a time. Each inch could be the difference between a pivot on safe ground and a roll into a trap shallow enough to hold, deep enough to kill. On the net, the immobilized lead tank dropped out. Its battery went from weak thud to flat line. Before it did, someone in that crew shouted the kind of warning you give with no time to choose words. "Culvert, off right," and a babble of the Lord's name and a hometown. The silence that followed was so complete, Hale almost answered them, as if syllables could haul weight. The hole that call sign left snagged other voices. Moreau's breath fogged his mic. His interphone words turned to a man talking to himself. "Don't shoot, don't shoot." A ping became a pluck, different music. Shrapnel hit the side skirt over a track shoe and skipped up to ring the sprocket. The sound masked the cue Lasky loved, the change in engine note when mass leaned. Without it, he drove by harmonics and memory. Under stress, bearings lie. His mind wanted to make the gap straight. His left lever twitched toward center, denial disguised as correction. He caught himself and yanked harder left, accepting that the right might kiss loose S-mine stakes churned by traffic. He chose the risk because a mobility kill still left a turret to cover Capel. He counted like a man on gear-teeth rosary. The hedgerow declared itself through touch, interwoven roots and stones set like teeth in a gum. The hull scraped and complained. "Short burst right," Hale said, and the bowgun spat, rude punctuation into smoke, not at a silhouette, but at a likely eye, making the far hedge a place you flinched away from for one heartbeat. The wind shifted with a little westerly lick. The smoke that had been their blanket wrinkled and pulled back. Cutouts rose and sank, a helmet here, the hook of a shovel there, an AT shield rectangle, low and snug, its barrel a black finger. It hadn't flashed yet, but its patience had a posture. Hale snapped a pistol port lever and lobbed a smoke grenade into the opposite hedge to pull eyes and ears, a field expedient trick he barely had space to try. The grenade pinged branches and rolled. A sputter became a thick tongue of white licking sideways to push their silhouette off-center. It would either confuse the Germans or hurry them into a bad shot. A pair of shapes at the far hedge paused. 2 men with a tube, cloth-wrapped, hunched near the tee. The angle was bad. A hasty shot along the lane might rake the Sherman side or their own. Moreau's headset took a squeal not on their net, someone close. "Engine noise, engine!" And the word fire broke into pieces. "U.S. tank! Do not fire!" he yelled into Mike and Smoke both, voice climbing, discipline breaking and saving them in the same breath. Hale grabbed his collar and yanked. Moreau shut up, breath saw-toothing, eyes big as coins. The bazooka wavered. The gunner's hand was white on the trigger. Somewhere, Capel's hand must have lifted because the tube dipped a fraction. The earth gave all at once, not a fall, but a surrender. The right front idler slide-slipped along the culvert's outer lip and caught the far side. The left track took more load and dragged the nose like a plow through loose roots. Lasky felt the balance change and chose to commit. To avoid a roll, he added weight forward and left and flowed. He fed throttle gently, smelling the engine's hot breath sweetness, listening for the note that said fighting or flowing, and got flow. The Sherman insisted on the hedgerow gap, not fitting so much as claiming it. The sudden nearness of open air wasn't visible so much as tactile. A pressure change, a drop in tightness, the way receiver hum lightens when you step from a cupboard to a hall. Hale's periscope went from bark and white to white and stretched gray. The nose cleared. "He ready," he said, gambling that Germans hadn't mined their own field of fire. Reason, crews need to move there. Risk, teller or S ahead. Outcome, loader slammed a gleaming HE up, warm breath smell mixing with breath and smoke. The wind did one honest thing. It threw back the smoke across the far hedge in a swipe that laid a plane of clarity just wide enough for a decision. The P.K. shield's left edge became honest, a slab with a nick. The barrel 3 points wrong. Almost there. "Fire," Hale said, soft and clean. The blast pushed smoke outward like a breath. The HE's detonation clipped hedge as much as steel, turning leaves into confetti, bits of wood and mud slapping the hull. The shield leapt and slouched. Men behind it turned to dark smears flicking from geometry to biology. If they'd guessed wrong, the shot would have kissed dirt and announced their silhouette. Return fire didn't come. They had a half-breath. Capel moved her wounded. As if choreographed, shapes rose in the smoke. 2 hauling a third by armpits, a 4th steadying a dropping foot, a sling like a question mark. They crossed the T in a compact knot, heads low, one helmet stripped of netting by earlier shrapnel. The Coax walked slashes across the hedge beyond, not at them, but for them. "Left a hair, short," Hale said, keeping the trace a foot high over their crowns while the loader's hands built a brass clink pile in the basket. Moreau's boot trapped a rolling magazine. He pinned it so he wouldn't slip and knocked the radio again. In the lane, Pike came up in smoke at a cautious crawl, his silhouette a darker gray. He saw them where he didn't expect, beyond the hedge, muzzle east instead of north. His map flickered and snapped to a new sheet. He had been seconds from ordering his own bazooka team to switch angle or fire on engine noise. Now he called them off, voice holding relief and anger bound by rank. "Cease, cease, friendly tank beyond the hedge." He saved reprimand for later. Those keyed-up bazooka boys would need somewhere to put fear, and everything in smoke looked like a target. Hale kept their horn ready if voices failed. Lasky brought the tank fully through. The rear idlers cleared the hedge with a hiccup. For a moment, the hull hung at an angle that froze them all, as if stillness could hold 20 tons. A root snagged the rear fender and peeled it back like a sardine tin's lid, metal, curling with a squeal too human. Then weight won. The hull settled into damp field, grass flattening into a print that would be a signature at dawn. They had created a geometry the Germans hadn't predicted, an angle the P.K. hadn't sighted. They breathed. The permission lasted less than a breath. At 10 o'clock, a shadow clarified. The AT gun's barrel flashed through thinning smoke as the turret swung. Hale didn't wait for glass to clear or bearings to be confirmed. His thumbs mashed the spade grips, and the coax barked, a line of incandescent stitches vanishing into hedge. The firing line was a guess traced on a pencil memory, but it had to be now. Tracer bit wet leaves and dirt. A spark leapt where a Bocage shield might be, a shard of light slipping over steel. He walked the stream left, then right, hunting the interval where a gunner's shoulder would be, turret motors whining through the swing. If this was a decoy and the real tube lay offset, they were sawing a lane into nothing. He kept the trigger down because doubt kills slower than lead. Lasky felt the hull lurch as Moreau yelled, "Contact 10!" and jounced the clutch, straddling the half-thought ditch he still counted in seconds. The right track, already humming the culvert rim, climbed the bank with a hollow clatter. He'd counted 5 at idle and 3 in first, but under the coax's vibration, the engine notes smeared. He held a yaw only he could feel, bumping bark with the right fender, scraping sap and wet leaves down the hull. Straightened too soon, and the culvert's lip would bell the belly. He let the nose float a degree before correcting. Reason, risk, outcome compressed to the width of his palm. Moreau's headset went to static as he tried, "Pike! Red 2, this is—" Swallowed by white hiss and a boom overhead. German mortar, short and blind, smashed somewhere in the milk. He kept left hand on the key, right on the bowgun charger, ready to rake anything that lifted out of cotton. English and French bent by fear bled through, a bazooka team whispering, "Wait on engine, wait," and then a click you feel more than hear. If they mistook the angled nose for a half-track, the rocket would take side armor square. He swallowed bile and listened harder instead of talking louder. 10 degrees more and hold, Hale said, level over interphone. Coax, keep it dirty. Moreau, stay off unless it's Pike. Capel's moving. A mortar peeled a saucer from the smoke and slammed grit against the periscope. Through the aperture, he saw a hinge of a Bocage shield and a pale arm jerk behind it. He walked the stream through that hinge as if sawing. Empty brass tinkled under boots, cordite, and wet mud crowding the turret. This was the oblique line the Bocage crew hadn't planned for. He exploited the surprise until the smoke closed the window. The wind, fickle as a hand over a kettle, pushed the white sideways, and their curtain breathed into ribs of clarity. Through one rib, a bazooka man stood at the hedge, wet burlap slung at his shoulder, rocket seated, spotter's fingers trembling a count. The man was American, but color meant nothing. In this light, every helmet was a dome. The tube's mouth revolved toward Hale's engine, and in an instant that felt longer than the lane, he hesitated between talk and fire. One word would drown in crackle, one burst could cut his own. He yanked the coke stream a yard high, into hedge crown, raining leaves and droplets. The spotter ducked, the finger flexed, the trigger softened. Not sure became hold. Risk avoided by noise. Lasky fluttered throttle to keep RPMs where he could count. 2 seconds in first is knowable when yards aren't. He toed the left brake, eased clutch. The Sherman kissed hedge at a sharper angle. Bark grated under plate, inside a rubbing like a ship against a dock. An inch was everything. He pictured the culvert as a ghost box under the lane, thrown by a man with a shovel, skewed and offset. Drop the right into that box and weight torques you. He kept his palm flat against the shifter and let gear chatter mark safe. Moreau glanced through his slit. The world was a wrong-held water glass. His breath fogged the vision. Friendly bazooka far hedge, no panels visible, he reported, words clipped. Hale cut him a look he couldn't see and said, "Got 'em. Ears on Pike." The radio spat a code group from someone else's net, a barrage request stepping on them. Moreau rolled the wheel slowly, like picking a lock in the dark. Capel came through underneath, low and urgent, counting heads. 2 wounded, 1 cannot walk. It tightened his throat. He kept his hands busy, so his voice stayed spare. Hale pushed into the periscope and studied hedgerow science at point blank. A near-vertical bank of interlaced roots as thick as wrists, earthen walls stiffened by a century's habit. A farmer had dragged through here often. You could see the smoothed arc of crushed root and stone. He'd marked it with his thumb last week on a half-track ride. Now it was a geometry exam with a murderer insisting on a solution. He held the angle and waited for breath to move the world in his favor. The coax stuttered dry, a long 3 count, while Moreau slapped a new tin into place. Hale's left hand found the elevation wheel, a quarter turn back, building muscle memory for a snap. If the Bocage bared itself. He knew the truth that hurts. They were now between where the enemy was certain they were and where their own thought they might be. Blue on blue lay ahead, not behind. A heat rocket at 15 meters would be murder. The Bocage shell would be a clean eraser. He weighed which mistake belonged to which death and kept walking the hedge. Then the white broke like lace again, and the world ahead washed silver-green under cloud. They'd nosed out of the lane mouth, not where a road would put them, but a few yards into pasture. The enemy had sighted for straightness. Hale felt as if they'd popped up behind a man's shoulder at a party. He slapped Moreau's shoulder. "Coax on the shield. He ready." Moreau yanked the charging handle. The first stitch found the Bocage's rim. Men ducked. The breech sat lower than expected. The bow slewed in damp turf as Lasky gave it a shade more left brake than he liked. A shape bolted in the field 50 yards right and vanished in thicket. Lasky eased them into a slant that made the Bocage's angle a tangent, not a ray. Soft pasture pressed under track shoes. Normandy dirt goes slick-springy under steel. Reverse would dig a hole. Surge would show belly. He edged forward 2 seconds, 3, letting mass declare itself. He held the engine note countable and refused the urge to hurry. The turret needed depression and time. Both were expensive. "Say position," Pike demanded, finally hearing sense through the tangle. "Past the culvert. Gap." "Field left of lane," Hale answered. The word's nonsense to a cautious man unless he'd heard the same farmer point the same break hours ago. "Understood," Pike said, syllables careful. "Capel ready to cross on your fire." Caution sounded like molasses now, but Hale didn't have time to press him. He had to make Hedges speak. The main gun had been a promise. Now Hale settled into it, iron sight a humid shadow through wet grime, crosshair hovering where axle met shield. He aimed at engineering, not a man. Depress, send. The HE left with the muscular cough all Sherman's share, flash eaten by Hedge. A heartbeat later, the world shook. The shield leapt in a charm of dust. A panel snapped back like a book. The second he was ready as the first rag settled. The turret worked like art when fear learned rhythm. The second hit raw root and blew a brown fan. Whether man or panel fell didn't matter. The Bocage's posture sagged. The gun no longer owned the straight. In the hedge left of the pack a knot of infantry flinched, visible only in parts. A sleeve, a steel pot, a muzzle spark that died like a match. Hale stitched them with coax. He didn't need kills. He needed faces down. At the edge of vision, the Bazooka team along the far hedge held. Hands to ears now, tube dipped to grass. Hale stole one breath and swept the hedge again, a reminder rather than a finish. He would not leave his flank hungry. "Go! Go! Go!" Capel rose in the net, a single syllable that carried 2 bodies and a stretcher. The T ahead, exposed a minute ago, was now a gray room with breathing walls. Her squad burst out, shapes with weight, one man's boots dragging. A strap slipped, hands adjusted. They didn't stop. Hale laid the coax a foot high along the hedge lip, pinning the places that would birth a counter. Missteps murder. He kept the tempo. Mortars threw their arguments, short by habit, finding smoke instead of men. One dropped shallow and punched a perfect donut. Through the hole, a man with a black cross leaned into a Bocage trail to drag it. Hale snapped a third he through that lace-frame target. It disappeared with a shock that threw leaves 30 feet up. Dirt rattled the hatch. Little sounds vanished. The world became throb and chew. Back in their blind, Lasky had shouldered the fender into hedge so hard he'd bent it. Now he felt the consequence. His right track rode a route like a rail, biasing left every ease. He countered by towing the left brake, making the hull's yaw a narrow straight. They straddled the soft between furrows like a tractor would. Enough forward motion to avoid sinking, enough stillness to avoid rolling a flank. Normandy asked a question with every yard. He answered with inches. Moreau reached for the panel and stopped. Hale didn't need his voice now. The net was a tangle anyway. He listened, and Pike finally said, "We are moving past the immobilized. You're exposed in the field." A simple name for an obvious risk, but the call mattered. Half of what keeps a platoon alive is a man naming a hazard so no one forgets it exists. Moreau kept quiet and watched the hiss of the needle on the set. Hale felt the coke shiver as he chased the hedge and glanced at the grease pencil chevron and angled box. Relief came ugly and small. His sketch matched earth. He'd bet a tank on a crooked culvert. You don't know why a mad idea works until later. He didn't have later now. He had to finish the problem and move before guesses became corrections. To their right, a figure rose with a tube. Hale flinched until he saw the faint star patch slick with rain. The Bazooka team had crept closer than they should for sight through thinning smoke. The spotter's finger whitened. Hale knew his choice would be to pull and ask after. "Horn!" he snapped. Lasky mashed the lanyard. The Sherman's klaxon bleated an ugly brass note that carried friend into a world where color didn't. The Bazooka team's shoulders loosened. The tube lowered a degree. Enough? One wrong instinct from a funeral. He bought a second with noise. Cappel's squad swam the open, heads down, feet taking long strides over the lane lip. One man went to a knee and came up. The wounded man's strap slipped again. The carriers hesitated for a blink. Hale dragged the coax line over the Bocage hollow and into hedge cavities. It didn't matter whether bullets hit. The message was, stay flat. Lasky straightened a hair to give the tube depression. Choreography born from drills met chance. It worked because none of them breathed. A shell cracked from somewhere to the right, Wild or a second gun guessing. It tore a branch over the Sherman and showered sticky sap. Hale ducked. The hedges that turn roads into funnels also break long-range guesses into twigs. They were in the seam, too close for big eyes, too confusing for small ones. Linger and guesses turn calibrated, so he refused the luxury. Moreau's bow gun rattled, reflex at a dark rectangle 30 meters left, a slit broad enough for a rifle. He walked 2 bursts. The slit blinked closed. Someone inside chose to live. He pinned it again for spite and stopped his own finger. He wanted to talk, but clung to quiet like a rule that kept him from adding a mistake to the pile. In the far field, a couple of cows watched, unblinking as machines nosed through habits. Hale couldn't see them, but their steadiness bled in as a silent anchor. He put 3 short coax bursts through where the body parts had been because bodies anchor guns. Exhaust, wet soil, burnt paper filled his mouth. 5 seconds high, then back, he said. Lasky warned with a toe tap and eased forward, counting in his skull. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The Sherman nosed that last half-length into the enemy's geometry and made it theirs by occupancy. The Bocage trail bent like a broken rib. The breech canted. A final he became punctuation more than kill. It spoke in the only language that mattered. The hedge sprang and fell. A helmet rolled like a knocked bowl. He didn't check whose. That belonged to later men with cleaner hands. Reverse, Hale said. They'd rung the bell. Lasky backed with the same delicacy as forward, holding the angle that saved his right track from the bad black mouth. A culvert is a hole you don't see until it eats you. He counted against his earlier count, minus the turn, plus the slough, fingers tapping the shifter in time with vibration. They let momentum be servant, not master. Pike came through again. "Lead is free, Rolling. We're buttoning past your smoke." That meant their seconds of crazy bought a minute of clean road for someone else. Moreau grinned into static without letting it touch his tone. Along the far hedge, the bazooka spotter lifted a hand. Signal, wave, prayer, tube low. The world was learning shape again, one man at a time. They backed as if on wire. The smoke did a last kindness, thickened in the lane, went thin in the field, curtain and stage. Hale twisted to look through periscope smear and saw their track print impressed into a curve where no one would expect armor to pass. A signature drawn on damp. He set his palm on the turret wall where his chalk sketch lay and felt engine hum through steel and line. He had broken a straight line and made a door. They slid into their white world again. The lane took them, hedges tightening like a bad embrace. The cokes cooled with a smell like hot pennies. Empty canisters clinked aft, delayed sounds finally landing. Behind, someone pulled a wounded man harder and didn't have to think about a hedge's angle. Cappel's voice cut once more, softer, distance or relief. All across. In her mouth it meant everyone she could reach. Hale popped his hatch an inch. Bitter wet air licked his face. He lifted more, committing again to a lucky mortar or petty bullet, because an eye still measured wind and smoke better than glass. He pointed with 2 fingers at the next hazard, a run of stakes churned by traffic along the verge. S-mine stakes, AP jokers where trucks hug edges. He tapped Lasky's shoulder, a thing he rarely did. Center it, no flirting. Lasky nudged left a thumb width and trusted steel and scene to him. Brass rolled and clinked underfoot with each micro lurch. Moreau scooped a handful, not a habit, a tick, let them run between fingers so they tinkled into the basket like water. He pressed the transmit key once and said nothing, holding Pike's line open by superstition. The radio muttered low gossip. An orchard fire mission, a litter team ask. Company neighborhoods reinfolding themselves around them. They came abreast of the immobilized Sherman, idler sagging, track peeled like taffy, hull hunched as if kicked. Its crew had recognized early and bailed clean, no hanging gear, no bodies in view. To their left, a dark scar marked where their first HE flailed open the Bocage hideaway. The geometry of that shot made sense now in hindsight. Ugly plans that work become doctrine later. He filed the angle and moved on. As they passed, a private outside a call sign slapped the flank twice with drying mud and shouted something that vanished in hammering noise. He had sweat in his eyes and mud in his teeth and would tell the story later, as if he'd seen all of it. Hale, looking down through the hatch, gave a flat palm in reply, an ancient acknowledgment, and kept his head moving. Gratitude could wait 2 yards. Pike's tank nosed into their white circle in a shadowy, patient way. He had not rushed, and his caution wrote lives into a ledger in a way Hale respected even when he hated it. "We're clear of the T," Pike said, naming that cross in the road. "AT position suppressed," Hale answered, choosing suppressed because killed is for after. Pike didn't ask for proof. He'd heard the blasts and the cokes, and he saw men crossing. They reached the place where they'd entered the smoke. It was thinner now. Drizzle kept it honest, lacing it with weight where it might otherwise have fled. Leaves hung in torn ribbons off the hedge where the Sherman had shouldered through. The cut they'd made didn't look like a gate from here, just a bruise in the green where breaths had been held, then let go. Lasky idled them where the lane made sense again. He took his foot off the clutch. The tank listened like an animal. Engines, a few human voices finding shape again, then a pause you could press your hand into and feel it push back. smoke thinned to threads. The abandoned shield canted in the hedge like a knocked sign. Hale tilted his head to the east hedge and flattened his hand twice in the air. "Back 5, pivot left, cover the junction," he said. Lasky raised the revs. Gears clicked, the nose eased, and the tank began to move.